right, enough housekeeping. Now we're going to dive in. My name is Gary Gerber. I'm head of product marketing at Conversica, and I would like to introduce our esteemed guest, Kerry Cunningham of SiriusDecisions. Kerry has more than 20 years of experience in B2B demand creation and management, spanning a broad array of industries and markets. He has a wealth of experience aligning marketing and sales organizations, and he's developed lead management processes for many of the world's most prominent B2B brands, amassing substantial, which I think is an understatement, real-world expertise. And with that, welcome aboard. Thanks for joining us today, Kerry.
Thanks, Kerry. Really appreciate it. You know, I couldn't have written a better introduction for myself, even if I did. Anyway, thank you for that. Really glad to be here. I want to start off by getting a sense for what the folks in the audience know. So we'll put you to work early and ask a question. And you can answer the polling question by looking below the screen within the browser page. Just below that should be a place where you can answer this polling question. And the question is to grade your organization's overall ability to leverage the leads that you get. And we're gonna go from great to not so great. From A, we're getting maximum ROI for every single lead, to F, we need to get our act together. So if you can, just please go down there and tell us what you think about your organization's existing ability to leverage its leads, and we're really interested to see what you have to say here. Just slightly skewed to the leaving too many opportunities on the table, but it looks like most of the folks that are here because they think they probably could do a slightly better job than they're currently doing in optimizing the output of their leads. Some folks who seem to feel like they're at the head of the class, but I imagine those folks at the head of the class are thinking, how do I stay there and keep advancing? So good, we're going to close the voting now. So thank you for voting, really helpful. Good. So, you know, one of the issues that we're very concerned about at SiriusDecisions, of course, is how do organizations make the most out of their potential, out of the opportunity that they have in the marketplace. And one of the issues that we've confronted over the last year or so is simply that the way that we think about the buyer in B2B has been off. It's been a little bit wrong, we think. And partly it's wrong because of the systems that we've had in place to think about and to manage the demand. And partly what the systems have done is enforced a skewed version of what that buyer is. So we think of this in two ways. So first of all, a lot of the folks that we talk to when we ask them, who is your buyer, will say, you know, it's the account, and they'll name the companies that they sell to, and they'll talk in terms of logos. On the other end of the spectrum, a lot of marketers might dive directly down to the buyer personas. And when we use the word buyer, we often use it interchangeably to mean both of these two things, the account and the persona. And the truth of the matter is that right in between the account and the persona is what we think of as the Goldilocks zone for defining a buyer. The first part of that is this thing that we call a buying center. So if you sell to accounts, particularly anything from a medium-sized account up to large enterprise accounts, chances are there are multiple parts of that organization that could buy from you. It could be determined geographically. You know, you sell differently to North America and separately to Europe, or it could be by division or department of a company. So inside companies are these buying centers. These are the places that experience the need that you address with your solution, and they have the autonomy, and that often means the budget, to solve that problem for themselves. So there's a buying center. Now that buying center is represented by a group of people, and this buying group or buying team is the set of people that actually represent that need that they want to solve out to the rest of the world, and they're responsible for addressing that need, finding a solution. So when we think about the buyer in B2B, this isn't radical thinking, but it's really a group of people, not one person, and it's very often a part of an account, not the whole thing. So that got us to thinking a little more deeply about this question of what a B2B buyer is. And so we know that it's a buying group, And then if we think about that buying group, there's some things that we need to understand about that. So who are the people involved and what are their relationships? And that's one of the key dimensions of a buying group. These people don't all have the same influence on the buying process. They don't all have the same information needs. Some of them have biases toward one kind of solution or certain features in a solution, and they compete with each other in addition to cooperating in order to buy. As a seller, you have to know that, and you have to be able to address that effectively. The second dimension about a buying group I think is really important is understanding the resources that that buying group commands. Clearly, that buying group has to command the resources necessary to buy your solution, or they're not very interesting to you. That often has to do with the authority of the people in the group and is covered by that kind of term authority of the people in the group. But we need to understand that clearly. So that got us started thinking about the buying group, but the buying group really is only of interest to us in as much as it has a need that is a good fit for our solution. So at the center of this thing, we have to be thinking about buyer needs. And does the buyer have a need that's a great fit for our solution? And when we think about that and start with the buyer needs, obviously the fit of that need is important. The other dimension that's really important to think about is how urgently a buyer needs to solve that problem. Is this a nice to solve problem, or is this something that's critical to the business? So these two dimensions, when we thought about them, the need and then the buying group that surrounds that need and is responsible for addressing it, when we thought about that, what occurred to us is that's actually the fundamental unit of demand that organizations have to identify. They've got to define it and then identify it, and then your job is to attract and engage and qualify and convert and all of those things. That fundamental unit of demand. And the key thing is there may be many of these units of demand inside any one of your accounts. Now, for some of you, you only have one of these things inside your accounts, and an account and a unit of demand or demand unit are the same thing. But for many of you, you have multiple opportunities to sell inside one account. And if you do, you have multiple demand units. And if you're counting your addressable market in terms of the number of accounts rather than demand units, chances are you don't have an accurate count. Okay, so we'll talk more about that in a second. But the key thing was we looked at that and said, okay, that looks right. That looks like the unit of demand that we need to attract, engage, and all of that. But the problem is that's not what it looks like in the systems that we use to generate, nurture, and track the progress of demand. Our systems look like this. Our systems look like lots of individuals, think of each one of these things as a lead that comes in and is sitting in our marketing automation platform in various stages of being nurtured and consuming content. And if you look at all of these icons, there's lots of them on the screen. It'd be pretty hard to count them, but you might notice that there's a bunch of different colors. So you could think, well, each of those colors might represent one buying group, one opportunity to sell, but it's really hard to see and to count them. So this is our little analogy, because what we really think is happening is that behind the scenes, those individuals from the same buying group, they're already working together. They haven't told us yet. They're not linked in any way in our systems yet, but they're very likely already working together. And if what we do is treat them as if they're all independent entities operating on their own outside of the influence of the other members of that group, then we're likely to miss a really important understanding of who our buyer is and how we're doing in progressing those buyers through their buyer journey and through our sales process. And it'll become a little more clear why this is really important for this conversation about AI in just a minute. Before we go there, I want to talk a little bit about what that means in terms of how we do progress demand through our units. So many of you will have seen this is the new version of SiriusDecisions Demand Waterfall. We call it the Demand Unit Waterfall. And it's got a couple of new stages. Right at the top of the Demand Unit Waterfall, we've got a stage that corresponds to your addressable market. And then we follow the demand down through the addressable market all the way to the point where it's closed. The key thing to understand here is that we're not counting individual leads anymore. What we're counting are these units of demand or demand units. So that's one of the critical things. Now, I'm not going to go through every stage right here, excuse me, but we are going to pause on especially the first 4 stages in just a minute. So critical thing to understand about both the demand unit and the demand unit waterfall is that if we have leads in our marketing automation platforms and whatever coming in today, chances are that one individual that we think about is not working alone, and we probably have other people from that same organization in our marketing automation platforms and CRM systems at the same time. If we really want to treat those leads effectively, and we want to understand how likely they are to move through our systems, we probably ought to group them together and then look at how they progress through that buying process together rather than separately. And critically, we want to be able to execute our engagement and nurture programs, not just to one lead at a time, but to the group of people from that organization that are working together to make a purchase for their organization. All right, so let's dive in and take a look at the stages. The first one is a brand new stage, but it's not new to B2B at all in any way. This is the stage that measures the addressable market. Now, most organizations today, when they do this periodically, and they measure it in terms of accounts. Very often they'll just use the term logo. Again, if you sell one thing one time to each company that you sell to, then your accounts and your demand units are the same thing. But if you sell two different solutions to each account, then you have two different potential demand units inside that account, and so your addressable market is 2 times the number of accounts. If you have dozens of solutions that you sell to many different parts of the organization, then it gets substantially more complex than that. We really think today, particularly with the advances that have been made using AI in looking at the B2B universe, it's possible to get a much better number for your addressable market today, and so we think that's a really worthy effort. Also, just the idea of making sure that the entire organization is really aligned about how you define what your addressable market is, we think is really critically important. All right, so let's say you do that. You do a really great job of defining your addressable market. You're counting it in terms of these fundamental units of demand now. You're not counting it just in terms of accounts. The next thing we want to know is how much of that addressable market is likely to be in market today. How many of those demand units could I actually sell to? We all know that the answer is not going to be 100% at any given point in time. Some of your prospects will have just bought something from you, some from somebody else, and some may not be in the position for one reason or another to buy at all. But some will. So how do we detect whether some of those demand units are actually in the market? One of the ways you do that is through looking at buying intent. Can we tell who's researching solutions, who's visiting our website, who's conducting searches online, visiting competitor websites, visiting third-party websites to research solutions? All of those things are possible for a lot of the B2B market today. And so we strongly encourage organizations to go out and try to figure out how would you know whether one of your demand units is actually in the market today. Because if you can know that, focusing on that portion of the addressable market is going to make you a lot more efficient as a marketing organization. All right, so that's the active demand stage. Those 2 stages are brand new. This 3rd stage is a replacement for what was the first stage in the old demand waterfall. So in the old demand waterfall, it began with inquiries. And so those are the hand raisers. Those are people who come to your website and fill out a form. Today, we have the engaged demand stage. And the engaged demand stage starts with the same thing. It starts with a member of a buying group that you're interested in, one of those demand units, coming to your website and filling out a form, or stopping by a booth at a trade show, any one of those things where they identify themselves and they opt in. Only now what's different is when we get 2 of those things from the same organization, we want to group them right away, and we want to start tracking their progress right away. What we've seen in the past, and we'll talk more about this in a second, is when you treat them independently, you become less efficient than you could be, and you get a false understanding of how many opportunities there are to sell. And when you treat them separately, you also may fail to engage really key important members of that buying group. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about in just a minute when we look at how AI can help engage more of these buyers. So the engage stage what's really different here is where we were scoring leads before individually. Now we want to group those leads together, and we want to start to add up those lead scores, whether we add them or do something fancier than that, at the level of the buying unit, the demand unit that they come from, so that we're really tracking the engagement of the whole demand unit and not just each individual by him or herself. So that's the engage stage, really important. What we're really hoping here is that we really treat all important members, all influencers from that demand unit, and not just one at a time. Now, when that demand unit becomes engaged and it's at the point where we think, there really is something happening inside this organization that we need to pay attention to, then we would shift that demand unit to the prioritized demand stage. And the prioritized demand stage is the stage at which we're going to have somebody reach out and make a phone call, send a personal email, try to reach them on social media, et cetera. So we're going to conduct some personal outreach to the members of this buying group. And again, the key difference here is in the past, if you're following up on a lead, you're just calling that one person. The behavior that we've seen across so many of our clients is that even when you get a lead, an inquiry from one of your best possible target accounts, the telequal reps or the sales reps who are following up on that lead very often will just make 5 or 6 calls to that one individual person. That person doesn't answer the phone, we give up, right? So even if that account was a great account, we try this one person and then we give up. Now, I think everybody recognizes that's probably not the right behavior. So by delivering multiple contacts at the same time attached to this demand unit rather than just one lead at a time, we hope to help really encourage organizations to engage more deeply, to prospect more deeply in those organizations, and not to stop at just that one first contact who comes along. All right, so those are the first 4 stages of the new demand unit waterfall. And we want to focus on those because we think this is a stage at which, we think there are use for AI throughout the demand waterfall, but we're going to talk particularly about why it's important at this stage. So now I'm going to shift the conversation to talk specifically about AI. And one of the things that happens, I talk with our clients about AI a lot, and one of the questions that comes up most often is very simply, what is it? We hear the term used all over the place in so many different contexts that we thought it'd be a good idea to take just a minute to kind of demystify what it means. And it starts by understanding what intelligence is. Intelligence can be defined a lot of different ways, but a very simple and very useful definition of intelligence is simply the ability to acquire and apply information, data, knowledge to generate capabilities, skills, the ability to operate in the world, right? So you take in information, process it, and you have an ability afterwards to do something that you couldn't do before. So illustrated here, inputs and experience, plus some processing that goes on inside your heads, and it results in abilities and inferences. And inferences are really predictions, the ability to think about what's going to happen if you take an action. So artificial intelligence, very simply, is doing that, but doing it in a machine, right? So having a machine that takes in inputs, applies algorithms, it processes those inputs, and from that processing, capabilities arise, the ability to make decisions, the ability to make predictions, the ability to automate some actions. And so critically, what we see with artificial intelligence is that we're automating actions, we're making actions faster, we're making better decisions. There are a couple of other terms that we see used a lot when people are talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning. Right? Machine learning is a term we've heard a lot. You can, for all intents and purposes, when you're talking with vendors in B2B about AI, and they tell you that they're using machine learning, that's wonderful. It's a technique for deriving artificial intelligence. But don't have to worry too much about the technical details of it. Same thing with deep learning, another subset of the techniques or tools that are used to create artificial intelligence. Critical thing about artificial intelligence, kind of hinting at this a second ago, is that it really does 3 critical things for us. One, it helps us make better decisions, largely by incorporating a lot more data and removing human decision-making biases from that data. So allowing us to look at a lot more data, taking our cognitive and emotional biases out of that decision-making process so that we can make better decisions. Being able to do the same things that we do or all of that stuff, but just do it a whole lot faster, right, to process very, very rapidly. And then, of course, the thing that we're all familiar with is the ability to automate repetitive tasks. And that's probably not the most important use of AI in B2B in some cases, but in some cases it's going to be hugely important, and we're about to talk to one of those. So bringing this back to the question of B2B prospecting and how to improve the use of B2B leads. So we talked a moment ago about the importance of there being multiple decision makers, multiple people that you need to influence within those demand units that you're trying to attract and engage. But we've got a problem, and the big problem is, the first one is that we don't have the resource to do that. Our telequal teams and our sales teams are already maxed out. We're already under-resourced. And if what you're telling me is I need to follow up with not the one person that I'm following up with now, but now I need to go find the 3, 4, 5 other people in each one of those demand units, I'm just not going to be able to do that, right? That just isn't possible, even though it would be the right thing to do. The second thing is that even if you did have the resources to reach out to all of those potential individuals that you should be reaching out to within those demand units, chances are you don't have the organizational discipline to make that happen on a regular basis, to measure it effectively, and to make adjustments where you need to. So these two things, the lack of resource, and which another way to say that is lack of scale, and then the lack of operational discipline just to do the right thing every time, present a really perfect case for the use of artificial intelligence to both make better decisions, to speed them up, and then to automate the process. All right. I'm going to just run quickly through this slide, which suggests that there are a lot of different uses for AI. We're going to focus on one of them today. But there are lots of different uses of AI in B2B, from sourcing and prioritizing prospects. So those of you who are familiar with most of the predictive analytics applications in B2B will know those. We're going to talk about insights for engagement today. But then there are also lots of others, particularly in the sales realm, where we can help resource allocation, performance management, really understanding what's driving good or bad performance within the sales organization. Creating better, more realistic forecasts, and then even identifying ways that we can identify cross-sell and upsell opportunities. All right, we're going to talk more about insights for engagement in just a second, but before we do, we wanted to take another poll now that we've talked about lots of the different possible uses of artificial intelligence. So if you could just look below the presentation screen, and tell us where your organization is in applying AI to lead management. Either you're not interested at all, maybe you're exploring it, using AI to score leads, using AI to help salespeople engage leads, or you've already fully deployed AI and you're here to tell us how you did it. All right, so what do we got?
So, Kerry, I guess since the poll is kind of monkeyed up, I think what's your experience tell you? As you talk to a lot of people, what have you been observing?
Yeah, well, what we've been seeing is that there's a lot of interest in figuring out how organizations can utilize AI. Now, people have already gotten pretty deep into using AI in sourcing and prioritizing prospects in the first place. I'd say there's mixed results so far, but mostly because of implementation issues, not because of tool. But I think looking past that, we're beginning to see the tip of the wave in people looking past that initial kind of use case for sourcing and prioritizing. And to me, this is a really exciting use case that we're talking about today. So we'll put our poll away and step to that next one now. But I think there's an awful lot of interest. So I'd say what we hear most often is people are exploring AI, not using it, but also using AI to score leads.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, with that, I think what we're going to talk about today is how do we engage more of the prospect audience that we know is out there. If you take all of what I've just said in the first 25 minutes of this presentation and sum it up, it would be that today you're treating your prospects as if they're individual people. When they're individual people who are working as part of a group and you're not engaging the whole group all at once as you need to, you'll be much more effective if you do engage more of those influencers. But the problem with that is it takes scale and it takes operational discipline to do that. And most of us don't have either one of those things. So with that, Gary, perhaps you could tell them how AI might help them solve those problems.
Sure. Kerry, great presentation, and a lot of good ideas there, and a lot of good focus for people about where they, how to look at organizations that they're targeting and to do it. The trick, as you mentioned multiple times, is doing it well. But then to do it well requires a certain degree of scale. And it's been challenging for most organizations to find a way to meet that requirement for contact, do it at scale, but do it in some kind of a cost-effective way. And we'll talk about what that means and some practical ways you can actually address it. So we were wondering, right, since at Conversica, our job is to help this type of contact happen, and to make sure that companies are maximizing their leads. Back to our first poll question, we were wondering how well are companies actually doing? To the poll question, how well are companies actually doing at engaging their leads? So we actually commissioned researchers from a couple of universities to go out and find out. And they created, in fact, this is the third year in a row that we've done it, the 2017 in this case, the Lead Follow-Up Research Report. They reached out to almost 1,000 companies across a broad array of industries, and also B2C and B2B. They wanted to cover all the bases. And you can see a lot of different industries, marketing and manufacturing and auto sales and insurance and such. And they reached out to them and presented themselves as the hottest of sales lead they could possibly be. So if that organization had a web page where they said, contact us for more information, or if they had a sales email address and you had the opportunity to write, whatever it took to contact them and present themselves as the hottest of sales leads, they did. They reached out to them. And they did it via web, via email, and something new we did this year, they reached out multiple times. So sometimes an organization is just having a bad day. Their systems are down, or their salespeople all called in sick, or what have you. But these contacts are made multiple times across multiple days with multiple identities to give the companies the maximum opportunity to be successful. And they didn't do anything tricky. It wasn't the middle of the night. They just did standard business days and hours. And they counted, even though we didn't use phone to contact them, the researchers did count phone responses, because that's how a lot of organizations do it. And so they did this across the course of quite a bit of time over the summer, and then tallied the results. And the results, Kerry, I have to tell you, they were kind of mind-blowing, and especially in light of the bell curve that we saw earlier. What we found was while 75% of organizations, part of the research was they actually asked organizations, how do you think you're doing? Kind of like the poll question, and the organizations ranked themselves as very good. So at least our audience did error of how they're doing, because we saw more of a bell curve. But 75% of these organizations said they're doing very good, and yet a third of them, despite multiple attempts, completely ignored that inbound lead. So someone raised their hand, said, I would like to talk to a salesperson multiple times, and a third of them just never responded in any way. It's shocking given the resources that organizations spend to get those inbound leads. I'm sorry, did you have a question, Kerry?
No, I was just going to say, it looks like the poll was conducted, folks in Lake Wobegon on that first question. Everybody's above average.
Exactly. We also found out something interesting. Since this is the third year in a row that the research has been done, we were able to compare year-over-year performance. And some organizations we find one year will do extremely well, and then the next year they'll do extremely poorly. And that's 98% of organizations were inconsistent in that way. So it suggests that maybe it's not so hard to be good, but it seems seemingly almost impossible to be consistently good. And so you're going to leave opportunities on the table. And even though 2/3 of the organizations did follow up, half of them gave up after one or two tries. So I think everyone certainly every marketer or salesperson on the call can agree that trying to reach someone once or twice, even if they're a hand raiser, is almost never going to actually achieve a contact. So they're trying, but they're giving up quickly. So we discovered during the research there are 4 key attributes to doing this really well. If you're going to follow up on your leads and maximize the ROI from them, there are 4 aspects to the way you reach out. The first one, and we call these, by the way, the 4 Ps. And the first P is promptness. Not surprisingly, right? The likelihood of converting even a hand raiser drops precipitously just after a few minutes. And the odds of actually turning them into a qualified lead go up dramatically if you're quick. And yet, only 13% of all the companies responded within a 5-minute window. You can see there's that bell curve, not dissimilar to what we saw before. So companies, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for improvement just in being prompt. The second P, suggested by the earlier graph, is persistence. You have to be quick, but if you give up after just a couple of tries, the odds of reaching the person are extremely low. And so it's almost, in most cases, as if you didn't even bother, because people are busy. You know, if we were in a room with people in front of us right now, I'd ask for people to raise their hands. Who here actually responds to a vendor's email or phone call or anything on the first or second try? And of course, no hands would go up, or very minimal. And yet, if you try at least just 3 times, research shows that you're going to double the likelihood of actually getting a response from that person, right? And interestingly, even though it sounds spammy, research demonstrates that if you try 8 times, it's 8 to 12 times is what they're saying, actually is the highest likelihood of the person responding, of reaching the person. People say, well, isn't that spammy? And the answer is, well, we'll talk about how to make it not spammy in just a minute. There are other P's to address that. But 8 to 12 times is the industry recognized number of times you need to be persistent and try to reach that person.
It also suggests, Gary, if it could, that if for the folks that are just trying, 1 time or 2 times, they're wasting just tremendous opportunity and have just massive false negatives in their system. They're probably thinking they've got a bunch of bad leads when in fact they just haven't tried hard enough.
The sales marketing gap. Exactly. Right? Sales, they're sending me bad leads. Marketing says sales isn't bothering to follow up. Well, we're going to look at how to address that. Well said. The third P is personalization. So you need to be prompt, obviously. You need to be persistent, not quite as obvious, but actually just as important. And you need to be personalized. If somebody even if you're being prompt and persistent, if you're sending emails or texts or what have you that dear sir or madam, with no reference to why the person contacted you, not coming from an individual, it's just coming from a marketing department. Lots of pictures and things that make it just look like this is spammy stuff. People are much, much less inclined to respond. So you want a personal greeting, you want a personal email account for the sender, you want to mention why they contacted you. And the good news is, largely because of automation, we believe, companies are getting much better at this. So there is good news, there is hope out there. And the fourth P, we didn't really have a P that means get it into the inbox, and then 3 P's and a G would have sounded like an old romantic rom-com. So we called this one performance. And that's, you need to be able to get your emails into the inbox. And yet 50% of business emails end up in spam. And that's what the statistics say. And realistically, if it's marketing type of emails, we know that it's actually dramatically higher than that, right? And that's consistent across all organizations. And realistically, even if you're prompt, persistent, and personable, if your emails go into a spam trap from the most important perspective, the customer's perspective, it's as if you never bothered to respond at all. Interestingly, when we looked at the data, a high personalization score, so putting in those personalization factors, didn't necessarily predict high likelihood of getting through a spam filter, but the emails that were consistently getting caught in spam filters definitely correlated to a low level of personalization. So it's important for multiple reasons. So how do you deal with this? Well, there's the obvious way is you say, well, I'm just going to throw more people at this problem, right? So that way I can be prompt and persistent and personal and perform. But realistically, that's not necessarily the most practical solution. And there's a reason for it. Here's kind of the curve. And if you look on the left, it's as you go up, it's the likelihood of setting a sales appointment or having the person respond. And if you go to the right, it's the number of times you try to reach them. And of course, not surprisingly, when we're early on, the likelihood of reaching them is high, right? So most organizations, most salespeople tend to stop at about 2. And it's not because they're lazy. It's because after about 2, that hot lead isn't really the hottest lead anymore. The new lead that marketing sent over yesterday is a hotter lead. So sales makes the intelligent, rational decision, says, I'm done contacting this person, and I'm going to move on to the next. The problem is the statistics show that you're leaving tremendous opportunity on the table because it takes 8 to 12 to reach the typical person. And you can't just keep throwing people at the problem because people are really, really expensive. So using artificial intelligence, now you can cost effectively reach out to the rest of them. The ones that the salespeople rationally are leaving on the table, you can find the opportunities in them. And we have observed that you can yield about 30% more sales appointments by just letting AI deal with that. Now, what does that look like? In the Conversica case, we offer an AI solution, and it basically presents itself as the organization's human sales assistant. So it solves the we're going to throw people at the problem, but in a scalable way because it's AI. And it's kind of mind-blowing, actually. I didn't create it, so I don't feel like I'm bragging when I say that she really presents herself as a human sales assistant. So she reaches out to every single one of those leads that weren't touched or were undertouched and presents herself as a human via email, via text, via multiple languages, and she'll do it as many times, mixing up the messages just like a human would do, not trying to sell, so she's not going to get in spam. She's just trying to help the person get what they need. And eventually, a huge percentage of people respond because she's just trying to be nice and help them. And they may respond, no, I'm not interested, which is fine because no human spent any time finding that out. They're off doing more important human things. But a large percent of the times, people actually do respond. And they say on the 8th try, on the 10th try, oh, thanks for being so persistent. I was really swamped. Good timing. Yeah, actually, I would like to talk to somebody. And now she does what nothing else does, except for people. But people are expensive and have bad days and don't really like this type of work. She reads the response. She understands it. And she creates new emails or texts as part of the sales team and engages that person in a human conversation. And she gathers up information like, well, what's the best time to call? And she introduces the salesperson. And when the person is all ready, then she hands them off to a human sales rep who spends their time the way humans should, answering important questions, closing deals. Unlike a human, she's infinitely scalable. She works 24/7, and she doesn't prejudge leads. She follows up with every one of them, and she never gets sick of the job, and she actually loves this job, so she never has a bad day. So to your point, Kerry, there's that repetitive work, right? If you're going to do the waterfall correctly, you have to be able to reach out to everyone in that demand group. You have to be able to do it consistently and around the same time. And that's repetitive kind of grunt work. So let the AI do that. And that reserves the people to do the creative work. Again, answer the questions. Find the people in the organization who are the right people to be talking to. Get them together, and of course, close the deals. So where do you apply AI? we get questions about this all the time. You don't necessarily have to apply it everywhere, right? If you look, there are places for people. If it's a high value of return, these are your ABM customers. You figured that out, and they're, and then it's worth probably applying human effort to follow up with them. But there's so many who are not in your ABM group. They scored low. They're after an event where there's all sorts of people who just wanted the toy, et cetera. You still want to seize that opportunity, but it's not a good use of people. So AI is a great application for that. And of course, as you would expect, AI is more than just AI, right? You need an entire infrastructure around it, right? You need dashboards and analytics, and you need, an audit desk. You need people to make sure that the AI is doing the right thing, and you need an experimentation framework, and you need integration with, over 45 different systems. This thing integrates with Salesforce and with Marketo and all these good folks, just to make sure that the assistant can both find the leads and understand what to do with them, but also keep the salespeople and the marketing people updated so they understand what's happening. And with all that technology on the back end, it's kind of funny when people see a demo of this. It's almost absurdly simple on the front end, just like any human conversation is almost absurdly simple. She just reaches out, hi, thanks for visiting us at the trade show, whatever you did. The person responds, she updates the sales and marketing people, she engages and gathers information like the best phone number, time to call, introduces a salesperson, and then makes a clean handoff. It's like, it just works. And it works, this isn't like a garage experiment. We do this for 1,200 paying customers. And the 1,200 paying customers are not like mom and pop shops, although we certainly have plenty of them as well, but it also includes IBM and Oracle and Epson and Talent and Embraer Jets. And these companies, they love us. They write, we have dozens and dozens of case studies like the ones you see here where they say, hey, this thing works really, really well for us. And they trust the AI to interact with their most precious resource, their potential customers, because they know that the AI is going to do the right thing and help them be more efficient.
Thanks, Gary.
Of course.
Let me sum up. That was really great, and especially seeing the data that you presented earlier about the follow-up on leads. To me, that is just digging a hole out in the back of your company and burying money, potential money and real money, where if you're doing follow-up on leads and you only call one time, maybe you should just not do it at all, right? But much, much better would be, let's take this much smarter approach and make sure that we're applying the right level of effort to optimize the investment that we've already made in all of those leads. So, to sum up, and really key message here, B2B buying is nearly always a team or group exercise from the buyer side, but we're not treating it that way. We treat it as if it's one person at a time, and because of that, we miss a lot of opportunities, and we mistake what those opportunities really are. And so when you do this properly, the way that Gary has suggested, particularly through this research, when you're making the right number of attempts, you give yourself a much better chance of engaging those demand units. But without engaging with some sort of technology such as this, it's very unlikely that you'll do that effectively. You either won't be able to scale to meet the demands of reaching out to all those prospects, and even if you did, you won't have the operational discipline to make sure that you're applying the right level of effort to all of those potential individuals that are part of the buying group. And so, I think that this is a great advance for marketing and sales organizations to be able to apply best practices through the use of technology that's applied in the right way. And so we hope that you all check out. I'm not selling for Conversica, but we talk about the use of the good applied uses of artificial intelligence across a variety of applications. We think this is one of those areas where B2B performance today is really subpar relative to what it could be. And so we think this is a great place to investigate for your organizations. So With that, I think we have a few minutes to take some questions. You can get a copy of the report that Gary talked about as well. And
Yep. So yes, go to some questions. Just a couple of things about this page, folks, so you know, but please stay for the questions because we're about to do those. The links on the deck there that you can see on the screen, those aren't hot. So you can make a note of those, or you can find them under the attachments section. If you look at the attachments section over to the right there, attachments and links, they're actually hot links to get these things as well. So let's answer some questions. Folks, stick around because, of course, again, we'll be doing that raffle at the end. We'll talk about that as well. Kerry, question for you that came up from the audience. This is a good one. So it says, how do you calculate the number of demand units as compared to accounts or individual buyers who are a part of a demand unit?
Yeah, great question. So this is an important, so there's a couple of things here. One is an alignment question inside your organization, and the next one is just getting the data and getting the math. Alignment means, does the organization sell to a corporate headquarters? Does it sell to regional headquarters? Does it sell to specific departments within companies? If you make a project management software solution, chances are you could sell that to 4 different departments inside each account that you're selling to. And each department would make a decision autonomously. If that's the case, each department that makes an autonomous decision represents a demand unit, and so it's however many of those departments there are in each company times the number of companies or accounts. Same thing if you sell your solution to company regions independently. You sell to North America independently, but Europe makes their own decisions, then you've got to count those separately. The key thing there, I said alignment a moment ago, is your whole organization has to be aligned on the question of how you sell and to whom you sell. And what we see very often is the folks at corporate headquarters will say, well, we sell a suite of solutions to the CTO of multinational corporations. But then sales is out selling one product at a time to departments or divisions within those corporations. So in that case, you don't have an agreement about who it is that you're selling to or even necessarily what you're selling, and you've got to get that first. So, and it'll make a huge difference in how effective you are as an organization to get aligned on that. Then it's relatively straightforward to go out and find the data to count those things. So I hope that answer covers that fully.
Makes sense. Another question, actually, there's a couple of questions here that are related. I'm going to grab these if you don't mind. Yep. These are about the Conversica AI sales assistant. So one is, does she pretend to be a human? The second one is, how likely is she to misunderstand an email? And the third one is there a training process for her? Which are all good questions. And I hope you don't mind if I lump them. It seems like it makes sense. So the answer is she really does become a human member of the sales team. So in fact, many of our customers give her a LinkedIn page, and she has a page in their directory. Some of our customers actually, this is true, we have some lovely pictures. They have T-shirts made, and they give her a desk. She really becomes a member of the sales team, and because she's helping everyone. In fact, some of our customers, when she's first launched, they don't tell the sales team that this is not a human because they just want the interaction to be very natural, and they think, oh, the company hired this assistant to go out and get these people interested and engaged and hand them off to me, and it's something that I don't have to do anymore, and this is awesome. And then they find out later that it's actually an AI. So she is like a human. How likely is she to misunderstand an email? The answer is that currently it's about 96%, 95 to 96% of the messages she deals with, and emails, and she also does texts, are completely autonomous. So she has based on years and millions of conversations, she has the confidence that she's doing the right thing 95 to 96% of the time, fully autonomous, doing her thing with people. That small percent of the time, 3 or 4% of the time, she looks at an email or a text and she's not confident that she's going to do the right thing. We have a human training desk. She'll hand it off to them, and they'll look at it, figure out what was the right way to respond, and then teach her so that she now responds correctly and knows how to do it in the future. And it's kind of funny, you'll find this amusing, Gary, is most of the time, by the time it gets to the training desk, they can't even agree. The people there can't even agree. It's such a wonky response that they argue about it.
Yeah, I was going to say 96% is probably better than I do on mine.
Exactly. And so that's the training process. And so the beauty of that is for our customers, it's just like hiring this super experienced, super competent sales assistant to go do this work. And you wouldn't necessarily train her either. You'd just say, oh, look, here's Salesforce. There are my leads. I got them at this trade show. Go engage them. And she knows how to do it. And for more sophisticated customers, yeah, we can train beyond that. But to get started, it's really just that straightforward. Let's see. So I have another question here for you. Let me grab it. So curious, you've looked at this and AI a lot. With all these automation tools that are available today, are we ever going to see a day when we take humans out of the customer journey?
On the seller side, well, I don't think I will see that in my lifetime. I think there's some substantial disagreement among the experts in the field of AI about how soon there'll be human-level artificial intelligence that could remove people from all of those things. That's a really fun conversation to have. It's pure speculation, I think, at this point, and I think the experts in the field disagree. But I would bet that someday, yes. Soon, probably not.
Makes sense. And the way we like to look at it, especially with tools like the Conversica AI Sales Assistant, is it makes people better. In fact, many of our customers report having to hire more salespeople because they have this increased influx of people raising their hands saying they want to talk to salespeople. So they wind up hiring more people, which to me is a very happy thing. I don't like the idea of people losing jobs.
No, and I think we've got a long runway before anybody in B2B marketing and sales functions has to worry about having jobs replaced wholesale by AI. I don't think anybody who's capable of listening to this webinar right now has a concern about that. I think for a long time now, for as long as anybody here is in a career, it's going to be making us more productive, creating better revenue opportunities, more jobs, blue sky, good stuff.
Makes sense. All right, a couple of other quick questions. Let's see. Tell us a bit about the live demo. The live demo is literally if you click on that and put some information in, we will have a human contact you, and they will be happy to walk you through how this all works in more detail. A link to the report we mentioned, the report, yes, that link is on the page and in the attachments and links section. The 2016 report is what you will see. The 2017 one is being finished for publication, will be available very shortly, but it's not available quite yet, even though the statistics we saw today were from it. And I think that is it. Any final comments, Kerry, or are you all good to go?
Yeah, I think we're good to go. It was really fun. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we look forward to more conversations about this really interesting subject.
Thanks, folks. Have a good day. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.